I made a fairly recent video about the Zeitgeist movement, and I got a lot of comments on there, basically accusing me of supporting the status quo, saying, well, you're bitching, you know, you, uh, how long do you think the status quo can stand? You're blind, and I pointed out, I find this actually quite offensive because I have devoted so much time to opposing the status quo and talking about ideas that would reshape our economy. And I pointed out that if you've been watching my channel for a while, that you'll see a lot of my ideas that I brought up before. But it occurred to me that instead of saying go back and watch my past videos, um, if I could just have one video where I lay out my ideology, basically, what reforms I would institute to create sort of my ideal society. That have it in one place. That would be something I could more easily refer people to, and have people get a better sense of where I stand on things. So for those who've been watching my channel for a while, I'm going to repeat a lot of stuff, but it's going to be basically all here together. So I'm going to start with land. For those who have been subscribed for a while have undoubtedly heard me bring up the name Henry George, or land value taxation. The Henry George theorem, as it's used in current economics, basically states that that under certain ideal conditions, that the aggregate rent in the economy would, which rent is basically the profit from owning a resource, mainly land, but anyway, the aggregate rent in the economy is equal to aggregate expenditure of government on infrastructure. And I think this actually understates the case. It's not, because rent is not just government expenditure. It's also the aggregate production of the economy as a whole. I mean, it's a collective thing. Like all the businesses, all their functionality, all the sort of sense of community they build contributes to the rent of the community. So there's actually a whole lot more rent in the economy than just that derived from government expenditure. So what Henry George advocated was that if we just taxed all or most of the rent through land value taxation primarily, then we could cover all the necessary expenses of government. And government could pay for all the streets and all the and all the post offices and all the services they provide, and recover its costs because the expenditures would show up in land values. I mean, another thing is land values tend to suck up inflation, because if inflation happens, then it increases land values, which if your person has to pay it back, then boom, no more inflation, and the government can just cancel out the excess or spend it on more infrastructure projects. Now there's an aspect of rent that I don't think I've actually gotten into enough. I'll probably have to make another video about it sometime in order to fully explain it, but it's called the margin of production, and what that is basically different land yields different amounts of rent, and the highest rent tends to be the most valued land, generally in the middle of urban areas, like in the city center where you see all the tall buildings. Those have the highest rents, and basically the highest amount of production can be done there, but they don't put those sites to the highest level of production because they've received rent for applying that rental profit for applying the same amount of labor to it as is applied to the least valuable land, which is at what's called the margin of production. It says the margin of production gets pushed further and further back. It weakens the position of labor by uh, by making them have to work for less, because the ones at the most valuable land will pay what's will basically pay the wages that are set at the margin of production. So probably confusing about now. The basically the short story of this, or the basic point of this, is that by taxing rents, would bring in the margin of production, which would bring production closer to the city center, and provide job opportunities at a more local level, while also reducing unemployment, basically eliminating it, as in terms of the structural unemployment that exists in the economy, as well as bringing up wages, because the margin of production is not pushing down on them like it does right now. And so also with the removal of rents, because remember, rents are the money from resources, which basically means they're a sort of monopoly fee. That it's the profit you gain from monopolizing a resource. If we tax rent, then that basically means that monopolies, that businesses can't make any monopolistic profits. They have to actually they have to actually compete and produce things in order to get a return on their investment. So what? Yeah, and so one thing that a lot of economists talk about is economies of scale. That obviously businesses want to expand and become huge multinational corporations because it's the costs are cheaper, cost of doing business is cheaper there, and they're able to produce more products for less and reap higher profits. Well, a lot of the biggest businesses, the biggest corporations in particular, generally the larger businesses receive a higher share of rent in their profits. So if you take the rents away, we don't have to mandate how big a business is. We can just watch as the economies of scale, I think, would probably shrink. The optimum scale for a company would probably go down, become more localized, and therefore more in the hands of workers. So so another thing about land taxes is they can be collected at the local level, which means that local governments would be the first ones to spend money into the community. And so by bringing government more towards the local level, it disperses power. So instead of a big federal government, which the right likes to complain about, and the left ought to be complaining about in some degrees. It's dispersed instead away from that strong federal government and towards local governments that are close to the people and can respond to the unique needs of those people. So now we'll move on to money, which which can be done more at a federal level. And the first monetary reform that I would want to do is make money debt-free. Now, I guess I should preface this is one thing the Zeitgeist movie was probably where I disagree with them most, is they talk about wanting to get rid of the money system and just have it run through computer, just have all the demand and all the economic activity run through computers. And regardless of how realistic that is, and I don't think it is very realistic, I think that there's something lost in that kind of centralized control. So I think that using money allows us to actually have more distributed power, more people power as well. But there are a lot of problems with our debt-based monetary system, and one of them is that when banks create the money, create the principal for a loan, but not the interest. That means the interest has to come up from another loan, which creates the problem of perpetual growth. So I think the first step I would advocate is to have a debt-free monetary system where government spends money into existence on infrastructure, basic, or just it's basically today. Except usually when government wants to spend money, they borrow it from foreign lenders, and instead they just create the money themselves. They wouldn't have all this deficit spending. They would just say, okay, we need to spend this much on this legislation, and then boom, the money's created with the same kind of entry that a banker uses to create the loan, except there's no interest on it, and then it circulates throughout the economy, and then of course it winds its way into land values, which are then taxed away by local governments, and this actually would create if what you could actually have with this is you could possibly eliminate federal taxes, just have land taxes collected at the local level, such that the federal government spends the money into existence, it circulates throughout the country, and then taxed at the local level, so then the local government can spend it on its projects. So there's that idea, and I think that it's an idea worth exploring. That is actually about the minimum amount of monetary reform I would advocate. There are some really interesting other monetary reform proposals that I'm not sure I'm entirely sold on yet, because I guess I just don't know enough about them yet, but which I'm really interested in looking into. One of them is the idea of what's called Demeridge. Basically, the idea is that you buy some piece of machinery, it rusts and breaks down over time. You buy a newspaper, and it gets old by the next day. That the products we buy have a shelf life, and at some point you have to use it or lose it. And the idea is that money should do the same thing, so that if you hold on to money for too long, then it costs you, and eventually becomes it becomes not cost effective to hold on to it any longer. So instead, you circulate it, and then other people have the incentive to spend it out somewhere else. And so I mean the way this is done is what Silvio Gesell proposed when he first proposed this idea was that money would be stamped every week or every month with a stamp that's worth a certain amount of cents, or whatever, a certain percentage of the total face value. So you'd have to keep going back and buy stamps for the currency if you held on to it in order for it to maintain its value. So your incentive was to spend it. Was sort of pass along like a hot potato. So unlike with inflation, it would actually maintain its value so long as it keeps circulating. And now I really like this idea. The idea is that instead of having to hoard money, it just keeps circulating along to where it's needed, and you actually need a smaller money supply to begin with. A problem I see with that is that most of the money in our current economy is not actual cash. It's just like numbers in a balance sheet, like your bank account, for instance. Most of that money is just digital. It doesn't physically exist. And I mean, we could theoretically change that to one where it is mostly actual currency, but I think there are uses to having it being digital. But again, I'm not sure how to create a system where we have Demeridge with currency that is not physical. And if any computer programmer or whatever has an idea for how we could have digital Demeridge for the entire economy, I would love to hear it. Because something that Charles Eisenstein has advocated for this idea famously, and he has said that he's talked about how doing this, making sure that money is not something you have an incentive to hoard, but instead you pass it along. What that would do was actually contribute to the gift character of the economy. Make money a gift, something that you give to others instead of wanting to, instead of being a miser about it. And that is, no one would, you wouldn't be able to create a whole stock of money like like people do now. There would be no need to, because it's always circulating, it's always available, so there's no liquidity traps or anything. Another thing Eisenstein mentions, which is is the LET system. It's local what is it? It's local exchange trading system, and it's based on Pierre Joseph Proudhon's idea of mutual banking, and the idea is, banks create money currently by basically creating the entry on the account on the loan, creating the principal, and so it's created by the process of taking out the loan, but then they only create the principal, not the interest. Let system would work kind of like that. It would create money out of thin air, but it wouldn't accrue interest. So say that you want your lawn mowed, and someone else is willing to do it for 10 Let's dollars, which it's all done digitally. So the person goes up, mows your lawn. $10 Let's dollars are debited to your account and credited to their account. So they can go spend those 10 Let's dollars somewhere else where they need it, and then you owe $10 worth of goods or services to not that person, but to the Let system. So you owe it to someone else. You don't have to repay that person specifically, but someone else who needs $10 worth of favor done. So it seems like there might have to be some restrictions on the amount of debt you can take on with that. But anyway, I mean that's one kind of bank reform I think that could be done. And and I think there's other kinds of just mutual banking, or reforms, a kind of credit union system that could be more accommodating to a Demeridge-based debt-free system, rather than the kind of profit-based banking that exists today. If all people will need money for certain things, and so there's a community incentive to have a sort of central place to deposit money and borrow money. So there's no reason why banking need be profit driven. It's something that the community itself has an interest in promoting. And there's also this idea of there's also other kinds of alternative currencies, and I think there may be a plurality of different currencies that could serve different functions. So I think perhaps just money hegemony might be a problem that we want to overcome. But one other alternative currency I want to mention is the idea of energy credits. And I think it's a shame that the Zeitgeist movement doesn't mention an influence on the Venus Project, which is this system called technocracy, which is like what they're talking about with the technates, people who run the machines and stuff. so they have a form of currency which is based on the amount of energy that the machines use to produce stuff. And every person, every citizen is credited with a certain amount of energy credits at the beginning of each month or year or whatever, and they can spend that on what the machines produce, based on the amount of energy they take to produce it. And that way we can also set a cap on the total amount of energy credits based on the total amount of energy that those machines use. Therefore avoiding any scarcity issues, which I think the Zeitgeist movement doesn't sufficiently address. And the thing about this is it doesn't have to completely replace the current economy like the sort of like the Venus Project seems to be talking about. It could function alongside the personal economy of other currencies where people are paying for different services or certain creative artistic endeavors. Well, also providing a sort of foundation of machines producing a certain amount of food for everyone, or basic clothing so that no one goes hungry or has to stay out in the cold too much. So those are some of the big ones. There's another issue, which is corporate personhood. That's I think I'm hardly alone in thinking that should be repealed. But I think I want to get into what sort of reforms we can have once we repeal the idea that a corporation has the rights of a person. There was a time when corporations basically were chartered for a specific purpose. They're like, we're gonna produce these kind of widgets, and that's what our charter is for. And they'd be like, okay, you're chartered for this specific purpose, and you're going to be periodically reviewed to make sure you're doing that purpose. And you're not allowed to do other things. You're not allowed to buy up other corporations. You're not allowed to spend money on political campaigns, what have you. So they had a very limited contract with the state because the corporate charters are state contracts. They're chartered by governments and therefore are and ought to be accountable to governments for fulfilling their contractual obligation. And so I think if we can get back to that, corporations can serve we can get away from the idea of global multinational corporations and get back towards local corporations that serve local purposes. It also sponsor different ownership models, like what's called autogestion, like worker self-management, where the workers, even if it's not a direct democracy, maybe they want to elect a manager instead of having a manager chosen by the corporation to roll over them. They choose a manager from among their ranks to manage them. For those that do have the traditional business model, we can implement kind of a 20-to-1 income ratio, so that the CEO can't pay his workers any less than 1/20th of what he's making. And it can also, another idea that can be promoted is the idea of workers' shareholding. Say, someone wants to use this capital to create this amount of money, instead of hiring, full-time workers, workers could just contract with them, negotiate their own salary with them, and say, okay, I'll work for you on these conditions, and instead of having to accept the employer's conditions automatically. And I think that kind of equality of power, that kind of balance of power where the worker is able to negotiate their own contracts, would increase under a land value tax regime because of the elimination of systemic unemployment. Okay, so obviously this is a very long video. There's a couple things I'm still kind of undecided on, which I haven't discussed. I have some leanings on them, but I haven't come to a final conclusion. One of them is intellectual property. I mentioned rent, and one one of the biggest sources of monopoly rents, other than natural resources, is intellectual resources. Using copyrights and patents to lay claim to ideas, even if someone else comes up with it independently. Um, I would like to say that intellectual property ought to be just abolished, and we could, and we don't need it, and we can just run an economy just fine without it. Um, but I'm not prepared to make that statement yet because I'm studying it, intensely right now. I'm doing a lot of reading on the subject. It may turn out to be that we don't need it, but um, I want to understand the issue a little bit better before I come to a final conclusion on that. Another issue I didn't touch on is healthcare. Um, as a practical matter, under our current system, I basically support a single-payer Medicare for all kind of system. But I'm also interested in the possibility of alternative healthcare models that might be more community-based. Some of you may have watched the movie Patch Adams. If you ever get the chance to see the real Patch Adams give a speech, I would suggest listening to him, because he has created his own kind of community hospital where that's it has much less overhead than our other hospitals, and serves the community, and uh, is not profit based. And I think there's all kinds of ideas where where community hospitals and community healthcare clinics could be run on a non-profit basis for the benefit of other communities, without having to have some big national infrastructure for it. And it might be funded from land values. That's a possibility. Um, so I mean, obviously this has been long already, and there are other ideas that I could have filled a whole hour with, but I guess I want to lay out some of the principles that I go by in terms of my ideology, that uh, and how they kind of guide the ideas that I look for. One of them is I think we have to have a preferential stance towards local economies. Now that doesn't mean total isolation from the rest of the world. I think it should be multi-tiered. The economy first serves the local needs, and then there's interstate commerce, and commerce that goes over a larger scale, and all the way up to the global scale. And there can be international trade, but trade should come after you've met the local needs as best as possible. And you might have some sort of surplus. Another idea is that it should be bottom up. It should be distributed and market driven. And that's where I kind of criticize the Zeitgeist movement most, is they're talking about running an economy based on science, which basically says we're going to tell you we're going to tell you how to create this whole society, and just shut up about it and fall in line, and then and then we'll give you all these goodies. Whereas I believe in distributed intelligence. I think that there's a wisdom of crowds that comes out in a market economy, and the main problem with the market economy is monopolization, and hoarding, and sort of the profit motive. And I think that with by taxing monopoly rents, by having a currency that is, as Charles Eisenstein puts it, has a gift character to it, then we can move away from the sort of profit-based economy towards a reciprocity-based economy. I mean, he talks about the gift economy. I don't know if I'd put it in terms of gifts, but reciprocity means equal exchange. Instead of I'm going to squeeze as much out of you as possible, it's, well, here's what I have to offer, here's what you have to offer. Let's do business. Let's exchange. And and I guess there can also be gift character to it as well, in that the reciprocity doesn't have to come from the person you're doing the favor for. So I guess that's what Charles Eisenstein is getting at. Um, a final thing I should say is I think that the economy should be the economic reform should be institutional. That is, instead of trying to steer economies the way that like Keynesian economics does, it's best if we can actually set up a system that a sort of institutional parameters that allow the economy to flourish uh, and run itself in a positive way. And so that's why that's why I advocate a market-based system is, if you have land value taxes, it reshapes incentives in a way that creates a more harmonious society. And the same thing with a debt-free monetary system and Demeridge, where you're you know getting rid of interest and large sense of profit motive, and creating a sort of gift economy slash reciprocity based economy. So I know I've babbled forever, and hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Peace.